can help keep the festival, we hope that you enjoy the festival and that you'll provide feedback about this year's event. The link to our online survey is available at SouthDakotaBookFestival.com, and the QR codes can be found at the information booth. You can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. To donate, visit SouthDakotaHumanities.org or stop at the South Dakota HC information booth at the Lodge at Deadwood. With your gift, you can enter our drawing for the original festival guide cover painting by local artist Gary Steinley. Donate $50 for your first raffle entry and $10 for each entry afterwards. The festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who have already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of the festival guide. And if you've not seen it, they're in the back. Today's program is called Unburying the Secrets of the Last Apothecary, Poison Throughout History. The author is Sarah Penner. She is a New York Times and internationally best-selling author of The Lost Apothecary, which has been translated into 40 languages worldwide. A graduate of the University of Kansas, Penner spent 13 years in corporate finance and now writes full-time. If you're in finance, you need to get out of it. She and her husband live in Florida, where she enjoys hiking, running, yoga, and cooking in her free time. Penner also sits on the board of directors at her local animal shelter and Friends of Strays, and she will answer questions at the end. Sarah, please.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. This is such an intimate group. I think this is the most cozy group I've talked to in probably a year. But I love this because you'll all get a chance to ask questions if you have them. And I know we also have some people on Facebook who are tuning in that way. So hello to everybody who's tuning in live as well. So thank you, Francie, for that lovely introduction and for driving me all over town. She picked me up at the Rapid City Airport, and that's where I'm staying, and is hauling me from here to there all day today. So this is my very first time in South Dakota. I feel kind of at home here, though. It has a Midwestern feel, just like Kansas, where I grew up. And as Francie mentioned, 7 years ago or so, my husband and I relocated from Kansas to Florida, where we live now. I'm in Tampa and very happy there. It's got a fabulous literary community, lots of outdoor activities. So for anyone who hasn't visited that area, I highly recommend it. And tomorrow I am waking up. The shuttle is coming to get me at 5:45 in the morning, and I'm flying to an event in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania tomorrow night. I'm crossing all my fingers if you all could send good vibes, because I arrive about 2 hours before their annual fundraiser, and I'm the only speaker. So if I don't show up, I don't know what they're going to do. And there's a pretty hefty per head ticket price that they paid to be there. So I am just leaving it up to the universe. So please, everybody, send good vibes. So what I want to talk about today is my journey from finance to being an author. That's probably one of the least likely career paths that someone might expect for themselves. And I want to talk about The Lost Apothecary, which is my debut. I did have a second book come out in the spring called The Lennon Seance Society. But it's interesting, the Lennon Seance Society, while it sold better than The Lost Apothecary for about 6 weeks, The Lost Apothecary surpassed it and is still just, book clubs are falling in love with it, readers are falling in love with it, even though it's been out since March of 2021. So I will kind of dive into that journey. I went to the University of Kansas. I got a degree in finance. Immediately upon graduation, went to work in the corporate world. And I always loved math. I don't mind spreadsheets. I like working with numbers and data. But I found after a few years in the corporate workforce, that I often went home and felt creatively unfulfilled. So I'm very introspective, and I kind of asked myself, what were some of the things that I enjoyed doing as a child that I could maybe get back into, even though I'm working full time, just to kind of satisfy that creative side of me. So I dabbled in needlepoint, knitting. I tried crocheting, but I was horrible at that. Sewing, quilting, and writing. So since I was a child, I always loved keeping a diary and a journal. I have always found words to be very cathartic, and I dabbled in a little bit of poetry even, terrible, horrible poetry, and I don't even know that it qualifies as poetry, but in high school and college, generally as I was trying to sort of get through whatever the latest breakup was, I would write a little bit of poetry. So I decided in my late 20s, I am going to enroll in an online creative writing class. So that's what I did. And if we have any writers in the group, I took my classes through Gotham, NYC. They're online. Huge assortment of fabulous classes. I highly recommend. They go anywhere from like 6 to 18 weeks, and fiction, nonfiction, screenwriting, the industry, whatever you want to know. So I enrolled in one of these 12-week fiction writing courses. Absolutely loved it. I loved having my work critiqued by my classmates, my instructor. And so at the end of this 12-week period, I decided, okay, I am ready now to write a novel, because once you've taken a 12-week class, that's all you need, right? You're good to go then. So I spent more than a year writing my first book, and I will tell you now, it is not The Lost Apothecary. So I spent about a year writing this book. I would wake up every day at 5 in the morning, and I would write for several hours before I went into my day job, which at the time was in Wichita, Kansas, at a very large private oil and gas company known as Koch Industries, KOCH. So I would write before work, and after about a year, I had a book that was ready. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the publishing industry, you don't simply take a book manuscript to Simon & Schuster or HarperCollins. You go through a literary agent. They're the gatekeepers to the industry, and they keep 15% of every dollar that we as authors make, but they are worth their weight in gold. So I started querying literary agents with this manuscript of mine. And over the course of many, many months, I received 130 rejections. The reason that number is so large is because I kept hearing the word no. So I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel with the agents that were out there, but they just kept telling me no. And a few of them were kind enough to give me some feedback around why they were declining that first book. And what they said was, Sarah, the writing is not the problem. The writing's fine, but the premise is an issue. And essentially, I'll save you kind of the long story, but it's that first book featured two women in 18th century London who were pitted against each other for most of the book. And toward the end of the story, one of the male characters kind of fixes a lot of the story problems, repairs the relationship between the two women, and just takes care of a lot of the story problems. That is an issue. Readers don't want to read books about women who are upset with one another, and then ultimately a man resolves everything. So the agents were declining it because they knew publishers wouldn't buy it, and publishers wouldn't buy it because they knew their readers wouldn't buy it. So it's kind of a chain effect. So the feedback was, your female characters need to have more agency, and you can't have a man fixing all the problems in the book. I said, fair, valid. That was, really great feedback. So I went back to the drawing board, and I sat down with a piece of paper, and I decided to write a book in which, instead of being pitted against each other, women band together to secretly disguise poison in the food and drink that they are then giving to their husbands, brothers, and sons, jilted lovers, in order to kill them. So that's The Lost Apothecary. And I sent that manuscript. I spent another year writing this second book. During this time, my husband and I relocated to Florida. So I was working at Price Waterhouse, which is a large accounting firm. I sent that book out to 12 literary agents. So remember, on the heels of 130 rejections, I sent this next one out to 12, and 5 of them said, we want to sign you. We want this book. So it was a vastly different experience, all because of the premise and because I listened to that constructive feedback to say, what's the problem? So so my agent, I signed with my agent. She's up in New York. She's fabulous. I always say that if she retires, I'm not going to write anymore, because she's my best partner in all of this. But we worked for several months on revisions to the manuscript. She sent it out to an editor at HarperCollins. This is in 2019. And my editor at HarperCollins bought it overnight. She said she stayed up until about 2 in the morning finishing the manuscript. The next morning sat down with her boss and they put together a contract for us. Keep in mind, this was about 6 weeks before COVID, so I feel very fortunate with the timing because book deals kind of came to a halt for a while there during the pandemic. So within about a week, 10 international territories had bought the book as well. We're now up to more than 40 languages, as Francie mentioned in the introduction. So the point is, this premise of women poisoning men is universally popular. And it's not just something that our readers here in the States are interested in. Anytime you get into alternative medicine or anything about death, it's going to resonate with readers worldwide. So that, I really think, has helped contribute to the success of the book. So why did I decide to write a book about poison? I mean, I kind of already told you how I wanted my female characters to have more agency, but why poison? So, and why an apothecary? So I noticed as I was kind of traveling for work, I did a lot of travel in my corporate days, and I was noticing that throughout these cities, there were these retail stores opening up that had the word apothecary in the store's name. And often they sell things like candles or toiletries, lotions, what have you. So I felt like I was seeing kind of this growing trend toward these fun little apothecary shops. But I knew, and I've always sort of been interested in apothecary-ish things. I love to cook. I've dabbled in gardening. I like herbal teas. If I have a stomach ache, I'm going to go for ginger tea before I go for the Pepto-Bismol. I've always just kind of liked this like natural health stuff. And so I thought, okay, well, this might be, I'm seeing, as I go through my travels, I'm seeing that there are these apothecary shops opening up. I don't know of any books in the commercial fiction space about an apothecary. I like apothecary-themed things. So it was sort of like a confluence of my personal interests and then what I was seeing in the market. But then I sat with myself and I realized nobody's going to buy a book about someone dispensing ginger tea or headache medicine. Readers don't want that. That's boring. That's not interesting. That's what we see in our daily lives. And typically readers are going for escapism, and they want big stakes. They want death. They want illegitimate children. They want affairs. They want brothels. They want all the stuff that we're all too scared or choose not to do in our actual lives, because that's what fiction is. It lets us escape into these other worlds. So I decided my apothecary in my book is going to not sell benign, helpful remedies. She is going to sell poison to women who want to get rid of the problematic men in their lives. So once I decided on that premise that I'm going to have an apothecary selling poison, I needed to go research poison because I have a finance degree and I don't know anything about poison. But I knew I did not want to write a book about arsenic because everybody has heard of arsenic. It's uninteresting. It doesn't feel fresh. I wanted to show the reader what other poisons exist out there. So I went about this a few different ways. I started with a couple of resources, and these are all on my website, by the way, if anybody wants to know more about poison. I won't make you raise your hand and admit to that in here, but it's out there on my website. So I started with a couple of books about real-life poisoning homicide cases in England in the 1800s and early 1900s. And learned what sort of toxins were people using, what food and drink were they putting these toxins into, how were they caught, what happened when they caught, were they imprisoned, were they executed, what happened to the victim, how long did it take the poison to affect them, and in what ways did they respond from a physiological standpoint, how long did it take for them to die. So it was kind of uncomfortable reading at times, but also really necessary for me if I'm going to write a book about a female poisoner. So I also read a book about, I think it's called The Weed That Killed Lincoln's Mother, and it's about different plant poisons. and kind of some of the things I just described, where you find them, these really beautiful illustrations of these different plants throughout the world that are poisonous. And something interesting I actually learned, the tobacco plant, often tobacco workers used to, if they had like a cut or something and they're out in the tobacco fields, they would be exposed to so much tobacco and the toxin within that that was like a hazard for them in their work. So things that we see kind of in our everyday lives, I was surprised that in large quantities these can be fatal or very dangerous to us. So in the back of the paperback of The Lost Apothecary, there's a list of about 12 or 14 of the poisons that I mention in my book and that are used in really creative ways. One of them is known as wolf's bane. The reason that it's called that is because they used to, the ancient Greeks would extract this poison, put it on the end of their arrows, and go kill wolves. So they call it wolf's bane. That plays an important role in my book. My favorite poison, people often ask me, what's my favorite poison in the book? And I don't know if we have anyone who's got the book on their lap, so I could show it. Oh, we do have someone, actually. So here, let me take that from you really fast. Thank you. Here at the very bottom, there's this little green beetle. That's not by accident. That is the cantharides beetle. And as it turns out, that particular beetle has a toxin in its tissue, and it is an aphrodisiac in low quantities. So women in the 17th century used to, in these Parisian brothels, they would have little vials of this aphrodisiac that they would employ as they saw fit. But in high quantities, it's fatal. So that beetle plays a very important role in my book. I'm not going to give any spoiler alerts, but that's an example of something that I would have never learned about, this animal toxin, actually. I would have never learned about it if I had not done the research for this story. Another interesting thing I learned is that in the 1800s and early 1900s, the largest population of accused poisoners in England were women between the ages of 20 and 29. Mothers, wives, and female servants. Those were the three groups of people that were most often accused of poisoning homicide. Four of the most common motives for this: grudges against employers, so we would see that a lot with the female servants. Removal of inconvenient lovers. I love this one. That's just like such great fodder for a novelist like myself. Death benefits insurance, which we see even today. And this one's very sad, but inability to support a child was another motive for poisoning. So the book, I've mentioned the 1800s and early 1900s, which is important because my book is set in 1791, which was a very strategic decision because about the, I'm sorry, I've been misspeaking, 1700s and early 1800s, because in about 1850, 1860 is when we saw the advent of forensic toxicology, meaning that during an autopsy, poison could now be detected. So prior to that time, really the only clue that officials had that someone had been poisoned was this, the odor of garlic or almonds around the body. And so other than that, there was really no way to nail something down as, if it's heart failure, for instance, there was no way to know that that was a result of poisoning. So my book, being set in 1791, was perfect because it allowed the apothecary in my story to get away with her sinister behavior and not be caught. And for anyone who's read the book or has the book, there's more information about that era in the historical note at the end. So, I've mentioned that I read some real life cases in the plant poison book. I find it interesting that even now in 2023, we are still seeing instances of poison throughout the world. So last month, for instance, in Australia, some of you may have heard this story hit the news. There was a middle-aged woman who hosted this wonderful lunch party for about a half a dozen family members, and 4 of them ended up dead within the next 72 hours. Ultimately, but interestingly, she was perfectly fine, and her child, who was at the lunch, was also perfectly fine. Because it was 72 hours later, officials, they suspected poisoning by the death cap mushroom, which has a delayed effect on your liver. It's not instant like some of our other poisons. So kind of smart in a way, except that she poisoned 4 of them, and so that would arouse suspicion eventually, I would think. But that poison is in the back of my book. And I comment on the fact that there's a delay between ingestion and when that toxicity is going to affect you. So it's sort of a poison that sneaks up on you. But some readers reached out to me about that case when it hit the news. And then in April, out of Arizona, there was a woman who her husband started to get sick every time he would drink his coffee, and his wife prepared his coffee. Well, he set up a hidden camera, and there's videos now online that she was pouring Drano into it. And so he was suffering like GI issues and ulcers, and now she's in prison for the rest of her life for attempted murder. So it's just kind of astounds me that people still have the nerve. We have so much science and technology available to us, and a lot of times these officials and coroners can get these rapid result tests that almost immediately will tell you what the substance is. So I don't know why people think they can get away with it, but they still try. My husband is often asked if he is scared to eat the food that I cook. I honestly think he's been asked this question probably 100 times, and he's to the point where he rolls his eyes, and I always have to remind him that part of my job is I'm asked the same questions at every single event that I go to. So he really doesn't have much room to complain that he has one question that he gets every so often. But no, he is not afraid to eat the food that I make. I love to cook. He loves to eat the food that I make, and I love him very dearly, and I wish no ill will upon him. And I also remind him that autopsies are very good nowadays. So, so with all of this poison talk, and kind of the fact that poison resonates so well with readers worldwide, the book has done great. Fox optioned it for a drama series 3 years ago. They continue to renew the option. Some of you may know now that Hollywood is essentially like shut down because of these writers' strikes. So Fox has they've used the whatever clause is in the contract, act of God, that the contract is now completely on hold. But that would be amazing if someday, we saw it hit the screen. I think that they could do a lot of fun things with this apothecary shop that's featured in my story. And I tried to really create an atmospheric scene in which the shelves are lined with all of these dusty bottles that have sort of mysterious, maybe even magical tinctures within them. I haven't mentioned that one of the main characters in my book is a 12-year-old who believes in magic, and she wants to be an apprentice to this apothecary who sells poison. And so we kind of find out what happens with her journey as well as the story progresses. The month that The Lost Apothecary came out, and it was evident it was going to be a bestseller immediately, 2 other things happened. The first thing is that my publisher said, okay, we want to know what's next from you. We want to buy a second book. So I was elated. I sat down, pulled together a pitch for my second book, which is The London Seance Society, that's now out. It was 2 paragraphs that I gave my editor, and I said, here's my book idea. She loved it, bought it, basically on the spot. And then the very next day, I wrote up something else. I wrote up a resignation letter to Pricewaterhouse, and I quit my job. And after 13 years, That was ultimately what I was working toward. I told myself I would not quit my job after selling just one book or publishing one book. I really wanted to try and do it again. Part of that is I've always been somewhat fiscally conservative. Part of that was also just I didn't want to be a one-hit wonder. This is the arts. It's a challenge for a lot of people to make a living in the arts, and I wanted to be smart about it. So once I sold my second book, I said, that's it, I'm done. And that was in 2021, and I have loved every minute of being a full-time writer since then. So last year, about 16 months ago, I was at an event in Austin, Texas, and my agent called. Anytime she calls, my heart stops because it's either really good or really bad. This call was good, though. She said my publisher, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, wants 2 more books, and they don't care what they're about. And they don't need any option material, meaning they don't even need me to write up a pitch. They don't need any sample chapters. They just they wanted 2 more. So I'm under contract now for 2 more books with the same publisher. My third one takes place on the Amalfi Coast in Italy. It is dual timeline, and it's about a woman who is a scuba diver and a marine or maritime archaeologist, and she is investigating this mysterious cluster of shipwrecks off of the Amalfi Coast, and suspects that maybe she has stumbled on something about this coven of witches who lived in the area 200 years ago, and they may or may not have returned to the area. So that book has been a ton of fun. My husband and I have taken 2 research trips to Italy for this book, which I know is just such a pain for him. Like, I mean, it's just, he'd rather be at work. He also works in finance, so, but I make him tag along and drink limoncello with me and eat olives, so it's pretty horrible. But that book, I just this morning actually, so the book is written, it's drafted. I sent it off to my freelance editor about 3 weeks ago, and just this morning she sent me her feedback on it. I read it this morning at my hotel in Rapid City, and I proceeded to close my laptop and go sit on the bed and take a 2-hour nap. Because she sent me 16 pages single-spaced of feedback, which is not atypical. That's pretty normal. But it's just a lot to digest, and I will go back and reread it again tonight, and then several more times this week, and next week with a clear head I will sit down and start my plan of attack. The story is my favorite of the 3 stories I've written. I think it's going to be my best book, but it's got a long way to go, and that's part of, I mean, this is my job now. You know, I don't go into PwC anymore. This is what I do. So that's coming out probably early 2025, and then 2027 I'm envisioning my 4th book to be a sequel to The Lost Apothecary. So that will be Eliza's story. She's the 12-year-old who kind of believes in magic, and I'm very excited about that. I think that will be a huge hit with readers. Many of them say they wish that I had more of Eliza's story at the end. So now is the chance to deliver that to them. In addition to working on these 2 books, I do a few other things. I teach writers. I do some coaching, one-on-one coaching through a program out of London, the Novelry. If anybody is looking for sort of a program to help handhold you through the 90 or so days to plan and draft a novel, I highly recommend the Novelry. So I do a little bit of coaching for that. I do a lot of public speaking all over the country. So that is one of my favorite parts of my job. I absolutely love speaking and meeting with readers one-on-one in person. I love travel. If it's not obvious, my husband and I don't have children by choice, which is why I'm able to do a lot of these things. We do a lot of travel, and I think if we had a family, I wouldn't be standing here probably. And then I'm kind of dabbling in some other writing. I'm working on pitching a short story right now. So I sent off the pitch to my agent this morning for that. So it's kind of where I'll leave you before I take questions is I started this discussion with my journey in finance and graduating with a degree in finance, and then when I think to where I am at now and sort of how I spend my time, it's not finance-based at all. And yet, I don't have an MFA. I don't have any formal writing degrees. I mean, I said I did that 12-week class online, but that's about the extent of it. And I have all of 6 college English credits to my name, a freshman literature class and a freshman honors writing class. So my point is, I think that a dream and a lot of grit and a lot of discipline is enough, and I think I'm a perfect example of that. So I always try and relay to readers, whatever the thing is, it doesn't have to be writing. It might be learning a new language. It might be visiting a place you've never been to, starting a nonprofit, repairing a relationship, having a hard conversation. Whatever it is, the only thing or person holding you back is you. That's actually a quote in The Lost Apothecary that I've got pasted to the front of my fridge. I read it every single time I walk past my fridge, because there's always something in our life that we want, and we like, and I'm guilty of this as much as anyone, we like to play the victim because it's easier to make it someone else's problem that we don't have what we want. The reality is most often we're the problem, and we just need to take the step and do the thing to get us where we want. So that's what I would encourage you to do and like to leave you with, is just think about that thing, whether it's small or large, that you've always kind of been interested in, and ask yourself, what is one step that I could take? The thing that actually prompted me to sign up for that first writing class, in addition to just this general discontent because I wasn't being creative in my life, was I went to a talk by Liz Gilbert. She's the author of Eat, Pray, Love. She also has a book out for creatives called Big Magic. And she was on tour in Wichita, Kansas, and she asked the audience kind of a rhetorical question, but she basically said, whatever your dream is, if I came back 1 year from today and asked you what steps you had taken toward it, and you told me none, you'd done nothing toward it, how would you feel? And I wrote that down in my journal, and I really sat with it and just thought to myself, gosh, I would feel horrible, like if just another year passed and I had done nothing to pursue this goal of mine. So that's, I think, been a very important message for me, and I try and kind of act as the conduit for that lesson she taught me. I now hope to spread to others that you are probably the only person stopping you from reaching the things that you want. So be willing to accept rejection. I've heard no so many times. I've shed a lot of tears, but I believe in having grit and discipline and getting up and dusting yourself off and going forward. So that's where I'll leave you. I'm happy to take any questions at all. I can answer questions about writing, about my career path, books. If you need advice about what to do with your writing or your goals, sometimes I think I could like be a coach. I love just inspiring people, so I'm happy to talk about whatever. Yes?
So did you at all get flagged by the FBI for your research at all?
I wasn't sure at first where that question was going.
Repeat the question.
Yes, thank you. The question was, did I at all get flagged by the FBI for my research on poison? No, but authors joke about this a lot because authors are constantly Googling ways to kill people and ways to hide bodies, and the reason is that their characters are doing these things, and so it's a good thing that we're Googling because we don't know from firsthand experience, right? So no, I never got flagged. I've never gotten a knock on the door. If I did, I would just hand them my books and say, everything you need to know is in here. What I actually worry about quite literally is, I mentioned a couple of these recent real life poisoning cases. I really do worry that as part of the evidence gathering process for some of these people who are getting accused, they will find my book amongst their things, maybe with like some highlights or some post-it notes on certain pages. I mean, it's fiction, so, and I think my publisher would would have to take the fall before me as the author, but that I do actually worry about that, and I truly hope that my book hasn't given anyone ideas that they choose to act on, because that would be terrible. But I can't control that, you know. People are going to do what they're going to do. Yes?
I have a degree in this area, and I'm always mesmerized by the side effects. I never thought somebody would write a book about women wanting to destroy men.
Yeah.
So I'm a little slightly overwhelmed by this. The question becomes, I'm not very good with names, but this guy who killed his wife and son, this attorney in South Carolina, Magruder, what's his name?
Murdoch. Yes.
Murdoch.
Yep.
I was mesmerized by this high level of intelligence and I was just curious to watch his mindset and how I was glued to the channel of this individual's mind and how he walked through this process. Is there a demand out there for you to write and flip it? Because there's so many examples out there, where men, of course, destroy their families.
So the question is, for those tuning in online, is typically we see men as the killer or the perpetrator, and here I've written a book in which it's women. And they've historically, poison has been called or dubbed the woman's weapon, because women, and I don't think that this is a sexist comment because I'm standing here as a woman, but women are physically less stronger than men, generally speaking. So in the event of an altercation, a woman is less likely to prevail, but with poison, you're avoiding that. You are often not even touching or interacting with your victim at the moment that you're using this weapon against them. So, and you can do so discreetly. Also, women were often, especially historically, the ones who were sort of managing the household or working in the kitchen, where some of these things were ultimately most available. So, but is there a demand? Heck yeah, there's a demand. I think that readers love reading books about women finally kind of getting what they feel has come due to them. As a writer myself, my agent, we've spent a lot of time talking about my brand and the type of books that readers expect from me. And I don't know how to extract myself now from this expectation that she has and that readers have. All of my books feature women, they're very feminist, and they feature women kind of winning the day against men in one way or another. And that's what I'm going to continue writing, and I think readers continue to like that. I think generally speaking, crime is a very popular genre, whether true crime or fictional. But also there are a ton of women readers, and women like to read about other women. So yeah, I think it's, I don't see this trend going anywhere anytime soon, and I think it's refreshing and different because we do see so many stories like that Murdoch one. That I watched the documentary, it was fascinating. Men as the perpetrator, it gets kind of old, so it's sort of fun to see something different.
90% of your people who buy your books are women?
I would say 90% is about correct for the demographic of my readers. What is interesting to me is probably once a week I'll get an email from someone who is a man or identifies as a man, and they say they loved it. And it always takes me back because I'm thinking, like, did you read the book? Like, do you understand what it's like? Maybe something wasn't understood there. Yeah, men seem to love the story. I think often what I've heard a lot from men is, my wife was reading this book, she wouldn't let me read it, or she wouldn't tell me what it was about, So I looked at the back cover when she wasn't looking, and then I started reading it. So like I think they kind of know that they're not supposed to really be knowing that it's about women poisoning men. So maybe they know what they're getting into, and that's why they kind of have fun with it. Yes.
So does this book also take on a sort of psychological effect upon like the women poisoning men? I mean, usually there's got to be an act of like jealousy or even like trauma or something for someone to go out and do that. I mean, you've also said that there were reasons in the past, legitimate reasons in the past for this kind of thing.
Right, so the question is kind of the psychological effects and whether those are revealed in The Lost Apothecary when someone chooses to commit murder. So if I take a step back from that question briefly, in 1791, when this book takes place, you have to remember women had almost no rights. They could not choose to leave a marriage. They couldn't make decisions around birth control. They could not own their own property or assets. Their income was essentially belonged to their husband, and there was a very limited number of work professions that they could go into. It was very repressive and restrictive. So especially in my story, but I think probably in real life as well, by the time a woman decides, I want to go to an apothecary and get this poison put into some sort of tincture, they are so fed up and have probably already done a lot of the processing of how will I feel once I've actually slipped this into my husband's glass of liqueur after dinner tomorrow night. So in my book, you're not so much seeing psychological effects like remorse or regret or anything like that. You're more so seeing, leading up to the decision, what has pissed them off so much that they just are ready to take action in this way. So I don't do a whole lot of like, after the fact reflection. Now that said, it is a novel and things go awry and things do not happen as the characters expect them to happen. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but there is a very pivotal instance toward the middle of the book where something goes not as planned, and we see all of the characters responding to that and kind of having this, oh crap moment, what now?
One more question.
Okay, I think we had one up here maybe? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you use any special software for your writing, or?
Do I use any special software? Are you a writer?
No.
Okay. Well, I use a program that probably only writers have heard of. It's called Scrivener. Some pronounce it Scrivener. I have written all of my books on this software. It's dirt cheap, very stable, has never, knock on wood, crashed on me in 7 years. And it's really great for organizing research material and shifting around chapters, which I do a lot of, especially because 2 of my 3 books are dual timeline. So there's a lot of shifting of information. And once it is in a decent state, so like right now, my book, I'm working on it in Microsoft Word, which is your basic word processing software. So I don't know how authors back in the day used to write on typewriters.
Quill pen.
Yes, quill pen. How they got it such a good story out on those early drafts and they didn't have to just like delete entire paragraphs like I regularly do is beyond me. What's that? Cut and paste. Yes. Yeah. So,
I've got a question.
sure, we'll do this the last one.
Yeah, because we got 2 minutes.
Me, the last one? I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
No,
Oh.
I'm the one who says it's the last question.
Okay. I guess when you talked about getting started as a writer and
Yep.
the 12-week course, like if someone were to try to take those initial steps, like what is the cost of doing that? Like, is it pretty affordable to get started?
Yeah, so the question is, what is sort of the initial investment related to getting started as a writer? And I think this is a great question because writing and getting published should not be something that is classist or only available to people who have the funds to do so. I have always said all you need is just a piece of paper. Here I am. I've just talked about Microsoft Word, but a piece of paper and a pen, or a laptop and a pen. And laptops now at Walmart are like a few $100s. The classes at Gotham, I think, are affordable. They vary based on how long they are. So the 6-week classes, I think, are like $150. And now, granted, this was a few years ago. I haven't checked their prices lately, but I don't think I ever paid more than like $300 or $400 for an online class. The Novelry program that I mentioned earlier, because it's 3 months and a lot of hand-holding with that team, I think it's $1,500 or $2,000. I will say a lot of the people who come out of that program land agents almost immediately. Great program. So, but there are so many resources for aspiring writers. There's a lot of scholarships available to different conferences that are out there, and just a lot of really great organizations. If you just kind of do some Googling, you can find some resources, but the classes weren't expensive. And then the last thing I'll say is on my website, I've got some resources for writers there, including querying agents, and some tips around that, how to get the most out of a writers conference, how to approach revisions. And I know a lot of writers utilize that information. I check my website analytics every so often, and the people are out there reading those. So those are some free resources as well. And Writer Unboxed is a really great resource too. So thank you all so much for your time.
I have to count however many people are here. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Festival of Books. I hope you attend it. Most of there are schedules back there, so please pick up one. And there's also a book back there, and you've got lots of stuff. So, thank you. And if you have questions you want to talk to Sarah, I don't have any place to have her right away.
Yes. And if anyone has questions they didn't want to ask in front of the group, my email is on my website as well. So,
Thank you.
thank you all.